Welcome to Connie's Commentary, the show discussing current events, news, and politics. Today's show is A Year in Review 2022. My guest is Jamel Q. Duncan, and we will discuss the major events that occurred in 2022. So this evening I'm speaking with Jamel Q. Duncan. He's a scholar, a public policy professional, and a columnist. He's written for the Philadelphia Inquirer, City and State PA, and the Philadelphia Citizen. He's also a recurring contributor on WURD radio doing political analysis. Jamel has worked on legislation and policy for a Pennsylvania state senator, two Pennsylvania city council members, political candidates, and nonprofit organizations. With his legislative prowess, Jamel has written over 69 pieces of legislation, dozens of which are now law. In addition to his governmental, political, and journalistic work, Jamel is a freshman at Swarthmore College, attending as a Thomas McCabe Scholar and a Bill and Melinda Gates Scholar. Thank you so much, Jamel, for being here today.
Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Now, this segment is going to be a year in review, where we will discuss political events and policies that occurred over this past year and how these events affect the citizens of Philadelphia. So I want to start with at the beginning of the year here in Pennsylvania, the Republican Party was in a state of where they were riding high on election denialism. They swore that they were going to take control of the governorship, the state senate, and the state house of representatives. They vowed when they won, they would make sure that if an election didn't go their way, they would throw out the results. Some even threatened to retroactively declare Trump the winner in 2020. Their fever dream has been smashed by the citizens of the Commonwealth voting them out of office for the first time in more than a decade, and the Democrats now control the state House of Representatives. So, Jamel, what do you think happened that created this stunning defeat for these guys?
I think at the forefront, or I should say at the outset of this year politically, Democrats were at a disadvantage because of issues with inflation and crime, these sort of kitchen table issues that Democrats were at the time failing on. And, Republicans sort of met that occasion by presenting to the American people to vote on absolutely horrible candidates. I mean, we have people like Doug Mastriano running for governor here in Pennsylvania, and Dr. Oz for the United States Senate in Pennsylvania as well. When you have such horrible candidates, it's really hard to take advantage of your other side's downfall. I think Republicans kind of screwed themselves with this one by choosing those candidates. Had they chosen more moderate, mainstream conservative candidates, I think they would have had a better time. Now, with that said, I am a Democrat, and I'm glad the election turned out the way it did. But I would say that's in large part because of just poor choice of candidates for the Republicans.
Another first we all witnessed this year was a congressional committee investigating a former president and his allies for violently attempting to overthrow the presidency and throw out the votes of millions of Americans to reinstall, I call him a twice impeached defeated president. What effect, if any, do you think these hearings had on the population? And what lessons can we learn from how close we came to losing our democracy?
To answer the first part of your question, the impact on the American people, I think Americans were profoundly impacted by having access to what was prime time television hearings showing just how awful the January 6 riots and attack on our Capitol was. And I think that it helps us understand more of the planning that went into it, of the knowledge that people like the President of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, had that those events were forthwith, and the almost inaction on getting those rioters to go back and to stop rioting at the Capitol, the defacing, destroying Congress members' offices, and hunting Congress members. There was almost no effort on the Trump administration's part to quell that, and I think the American people seeing that is helping them who formerly supported Trump understand just how bad he was for our democracy.
Okay. And what do you think in terms of lessons that we can learn from how close we came to losing
Right.
this democracy?
Well, look, I think we need to be wise about who we put in office. If we actually research the people that we are, presented with on the ballot, and understand what they're about, and understand that temperament matters. Many people said that they supported Trump because of his policies, but temperament wasn't quite important to them. And I think January 6th showed us, this is one of the lessons of January 6th, that temperament while you're in office does matter, because temperament was what led those Capitol rioters to the United States Capitol. His lack of presidential temperament is also what permitted them to stay there for as long as they did. I think I speak for many Americans when I say that, when I turned on the TV watching the Capitol be overrun by his supporters, and also see just watching time pass on to just tick away without any sort of rebuke from him was stunning. And I think we all should take that as a lesson to take seriously elections, to go out and vote, and to vote in a very informed manner. Those are lessons that we should take away from January 6th.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that. A lot of people think elections or thought they were a joke. I know some people I know voted for him as a joke, and I told them it's not a joke. So yeah, people will, hopefully they learned something from that. Now, I'd also like to talk about this year we had big events with the Supreme Court. Now, the majority of the court voted to ban abortion after almost 50 years of abortion being legal in this country. They're also discussing taking away marriage rights, for example, gay marriage, interracial marriage, and they're discussing taking away voting rights. Jamel, do you think that the people of this country will go along with these types of reactionary policies?
So, I think the issue of abortion, as far as it being a constitutional right, is a very murky one, one that is more nuanced than I think most of us would give the issue credit for. And so I just want to start by saying that the Supreme Court found that abortion is not a constitutional right, which is to say that the Constitution does not guarantee you access to abortion, which is not a ban on abortion. Rather, it just says that the federal Constitution is silent on this issue. And, the court, in its opinion, gave their reasons for that. But now the issue is now, one might say, returned to the states for people of individual states to decide, the same way states decide whether they are for or against marijuana legalization, which is something that people like State Senator Shreve Street, who is my mentor and who I used to work for, has been pushing for here in Pennsylvania. Issues like that sort of provide a template for how states deal with issues sort of individually, for us to understand how abortion will be dealt with. And I say all that to say that, depending on the makeup of state legislatures and who the people of each state decide to elect as governor, some states will have abortion access and others won't, and others may have it with some tweaks and regulations. And really, I think this is the proper way for a democracy to dispense with a political issue, because if you look at polls of Americans, you see that most people are for abortion in the first trimester, but that dwindles as you go to the second and the third. And I think what you're going to see is policy reflecting that view of the American people. That sort of nuance, that the nuance being Americans being for it at certain points, but not at others, in a woman's pregnancy. I think can better be reflected in a piece of legislation than a judicial ruling, because judges are completely immune from the democratic process, particularly federal judges and Supreme Court justices who have life tenure. And so they are likely unaware, or even if they are aware, they still nonetheless are not responsive to the opinion of Americans on this issue. And so I think it would have been impossible for them to account for the many nuances that the American people have on the issue of abortion. And so I think one of the benefits of having it returned to the states is that those nuances will be accounted for. And I think that is democracy. Now, I am pro-choice. And on the other hand, I don't believe Roe versus Wade was decided correctly, which is, now this is not a view you hear very often, someone being anti-Roe, but pro-choice. And that's because I believe that, judges ought to have a very limited role. And I say this as a person who has worked in two legislatures, the Philadelphia City Council and the Pennsylvania State Senate. And I think legislatures are more equipped to deal with political questions than the courts.
Well, now what about, so that's interesting take, but does that get us back to states' rights, and then states change, like we just changed our legislature from Republican to Democrat, and then they might flip back the other way. So that would mean something like that would always be in flux.
Yes, that's true, but such as the case with democracy. Democracy is always a very evolving, ever-changing thing, and that is especially true with our institutions. And so I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. However, I don't think that that the usual democratic processes of the people electing their representatives, and their representatives making law based off of their constituency is negated just because the issue of abortion is now on the table. And so with every other issue, again, take marijuana legislation, which I referenced earlier. I don't think the American people will be fine with the Supreme Court deciding that for us when the Constitution is silent on it. And so again, I do support abortion. I just believe that we in America have a constitutional process for how we dispense with those issues, and I think that process is now being allowed to take its course. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was still alive, actually acknowledged just how divisive the Supreme Court's decision was in Roe versus Wade, and how it sort of stirred conservative bitterness and resentment now for 50 years leading up to the recent Supreme Court decision. And so, I think that's the result of the Supreme Court and courts generally just overstepping their authority. This is what happens when courts overstep their authority. We got complacent, Democrats got complacent and never decided to legislate the issue of abortion. We just kept kicking it to the courts. And then when the courts, were no longer in, the makeup of the courts were no longer in Democrats' favor, now Democrats, are scared for all the other slew of rights that they allowed the court to legislate for them. And I think this is another point where Democrats can take a lesson, which is not to allow other institutions to do legislation for them. And this is, a very controversial subject, obviously. I have a very quirky, nuanced opinion on this, but I think this is something that we definitely have to learn. And you know what? I'll go a further step and say, I think Democrats have acknowledged that this is where they went wrong, because they are now trying to pass federal legislation to protect gay marriage, because I believe they, whether they want to admit it or not, know that gay marriage is one of those rights, along with abortion, that is in public favor, but isn't clearly protected by the Constitution. Whether it's a constitutional right is ambiguous if you look at the text of the Constitution. And we now have a court where justices are seem to be willing to overrule those sorts of cases. And so now they're going to do their jobs and legislate. But my point is, we should not have gotten to the point where we have a court that's now more strict on their interpretation of the Constitution. We Democrats should have been legislating these issues from the get-go.
So now also you have the right to vote, because the Voting Rights Act was never made a law. It was just made an act that has to be renewed every, so many years. And that's another one of the rights, which I believe the right to vote, it's in the Constitution, but a lot of people didn't have the right to vote when they adopted the Constitution, even though they said people had the right to vote. And so and that's one of the rights that the court does want to take away as well. So are you saying basically, instead of dropping the ball and allowing a court to decide, there should be laws like what the president just signed into law, this pardon program, where he said anybody with a simple offense for carrying marijuana, they're all pardoned, etc. Is that what you're saying? It should
Yes,
be done,
yes, I'm saying
that way, instead of relying on a court that is based on precedent, and then that precedent could change. Now you got a new precedent. Is that what you're saying?
right. As I'm saying that we should follow the constitutionally prescribed processes for making societal change, and almost always that happens through a legislature.
Okay. Now the court also, despite their reactionary views, they have the first Black female member of the court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And this confirmation, they have this confirmation while it looks like the country's headed, with this confirmation, let me put it that way, it looks like the country's headed in the direction of progress, but at the same time, you have a number of reactionaries on the court. What type of role do you think she can play, even though the court is stacked against her?
Yeah, I think she can offer her perspective as a Black woman in America to many of the decisions that the court makes. I think diversity is important, not only diversity in identity, but also diversity in thought, and socioeconomic status and familial and religious background. And I think she definitely brings diversity to the court, and I think that will be one of the most impactful parts of her presence on the Supreme Court, which I think all Americans ought to be proud of. The first Black woman to be on the Supreme Court, I think it touched everyone, whether you agree with her legal philosophy or not.
Right, it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal. Now, next thing I want to talk about is on October 6th of this year, and you kind of alluded to this prior, President Joe Biden pardoned all people who have a simple federal pot possession conviction. Do you think this was a good idea on his part? And if so, why?
Most definitely. This was a good idea because you've got people serving many years in prison for nonviolent crimes. And it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to house inmates in prisons, and not only on the federal level, but also on the state level, which again is something that I worked on while working for State Senator Sharif Street. And so, I believe firmly that people who have committed nonviolent offenses should receive a very different treatment in the criminal justice system. Jail doesn't make sense. Incarceration doesn't make sense. If they are not a threat to anyone, that I think it is inexcusable to incarcerate them, particularly because, now, just to be clear, I'm talking about the people who are using the drugs, not the people distributing them, because I think the folks who distribute them are poisoning our communities, and that is absolutely inexcusable. But when you're talking about people who are hooked on a substance, so hooked on a substance that they have to go to sketchy dealers to get it, those are the people that need treatment. Those are not the people we need to be throwing away behind bars. We spend too much of taxpayer dollars incarcerating people who are not threats to citizens.
Okay. And, I know from different positions I've had, different jobs, that if you have a federal conviction, there's a lot of jobs you cannot get.
Right. Lots of housing you can't get as well, which is another part of the problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can't do. So even if you're out with that on your record, your whole life is destroyed.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. Now, we're coming to the end of the year with former president and current presidential candidate Donald Trump sitting down to dinner around Thanksgiving with a Holocaust denier, Kanye West, or Ye or Ye, and an avowed Hitler-loving Nazi, Nick Fuentes. This is unprecedented. How will this be seen by the citizens here, or how do you think it will be seen by the citizens here, and how do you think the world is going to see this?
I think the world has already made up. I'll put it this way: the international community has already decided that Donald Trump is an embarrassment to the United States, and I think more and more American people are deciding that as well. So you look at Kevin McCarthy, the Republican House leader in the United States House of Representatives. He recently, just a few hours ago, came out and condemned Trump for a meeting with the white supremacist Nick Fuentes, and so even Republicans just don't have the appetite to stand for his nonsense anymore. And I think that is the microcosm of the mood of the American people. People are just not willing to tolerate him anymore.
So with his embracing of these these two, especially Nick Fuentes, how is that going to affect, like, say, Philadelphia? Do you think it would have an effect on people here?
No, I don't think it'll have an effect on people in Philadelphia. I think this is a matter of national politics that is just another series in a very long cycle of Trump shenanigans, and I think this is nothing new.
All right. Well, I will just say my take on this, and I don't have any documentation, so I just want to put that out there. But to me, and you can give your thoughts on this, is that through Donald Trump embracing QAnon and these Nazis, to me, it seems like he's seeking to pull together the most loyal of loyal followers, people who, because of their ideology, will die for him. And it looks to me like he's trying to raise an army, a private army, to do more than just storm the Capitol, but to overthrow the United States. And that's just me looking at this. And I'm surprised there aren't other people talking about this, as far as I know. But again, this is my opinion. I don't have the facts to back it up, but it looks like something we've seen in history before. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think he's going to overthrow the United States. I think this awful group of supporters that you reference, he already has. He was president for 4 years. He won in 2016, and which is why I don't think this is anything new. What we're seeing from him is not anything new. Um, it's just again just another episode in his series of nonsense.
All right, well, it would be very difficult for him to overthrow the US military with these people, we'll call them.
Yes,
Uh, but that doesn't mean that's not part of his brain. But I don't know what goes on in his brain.
neither do I.
So, as an outside observer, what it looks like. So these are some of the main events that we've seen happen in this year of 2022, which isn't over yet. So we still have another month. We'll see what goes on. Um, do you have any forecasts, predictions, anything for next year, 2023?
Well, I think as far as local politics goes, it'll be very interesting to see how the mayor's race turns out. It'll be interesting to see who wins the primaries because, as I'm sure you know, Philadelphia, as a majoritively Democratic city, our primaries are really the general elections here. Republicans have almost no chance of winning any mayoral race that we have here, at least as it currently stands. And so I think seeing the Helen Gims, the Jeff Brown, Derek Green, Maria Quinones Sanchez, Sherelle Parker, and a few others, Rebecca Reinhardt comes to mind. See how that race turns out. Will just be very interesting because it's a race of, I believe, almost half women are running in a city that has never had a woman as mayor. And I think that will be a very historic race for Philadelphia if a woman does indeed become the Democratic nominee and later, the mayor-elect of Philadelphia.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Um, I appreciate it. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
Thank you for having me.
All
Very
right.
glad to be here.